What would you do if your only son, the pride of your life, the one you raised with every ounce of love and sacrifice, told you flat out, "I'm never getting married"? Not now. Not ever. For Chief Adewale, a respected man in his 60s, that moment felt like a heartbreak no one could see. On the outside, he smiled through the years, dressed in fine robes, waved to his neighbors with grace, and carried his family name like royalty. But inside, there was an ache growing deeper with every year his son refused to start a family. This wasn't just any father-son squabble. This was about legacy, about tradition, about a father watching time slip away, fearing his bloodline would end with his only child. Not because of sickness, not because of tragedy, but because his son, Kemi, simply didn't believe in love. Kemi wasn't the kind of man who lacked options. He was tall, well-educated, well-spoken, and handsome. Women admired him. Mothers whispered his name with hope. Aunties dropped hints. Matchmakers tried. But Kemi always smiled and said the same thing: "Marriage is not for me." His reasons. They sounded logical at first. Women only want money. Everyone's pretending. Love isn't real anymore. He said it so often that people stopped questioning it. Everyone, except Chief Adewale. You see, Chief Adewale was not just worried. He was desperate. He remembered the joy of being a husband, the laughter in the house, the bond of building a future together. His wife had passed on many years ago, and since then, the house had grown quieter. Now, he dreamed of hearing the giggles of grandchildren. He imagined watching Kemi with a woman who truly saw the man, not the wealth. But nothing worked. Arranged dates failed. Community pressure failed. Even emotional talks ended with, "Dad, please. Let me be." But Chief Adewale was no ordinary man. He didn't reach the top by giving up. He believed that if he couldn't convince his son with words, he had to show him something different. Something real. Something raw. And that's when the wildest idea came to him. He would become a beggar. Not as a joke. Not for drama. But as a way to step into a world where no one knew his name. No wealth. No status. No guards. Just dust, sweat, and silence. Because in that world, he believed, he might find someone different. Someone genuine. Someone whose heart wasn't shaped by appearances. But there was another reason too. Chief Adewale wanted to test something. He wanted to find a woman. Not just any woman, but one with a heart so kind, so selfless, that she would offer compassion to a stranger with nothing. He believed that if he could find someone who cared for him as a beggar, maybe, just maybe, she would be the one to melt Kemi's frozen heart. It wasn't a plan most people would understand. But that didn't stop him. He waited for the perfect time. Then one evening, without telling anyone, not even his closest housekeeper, he went into the back room of his mansion. He removed his embroidered robe, folded it neatly, and placed it on the chair. In its place, he pulled out old, dusty clothes. Torn. Wrinkled. Faded. He put them on slowly, piece by piece. Then he grabbed a walking stick. Not for style, but for the illusion. He smudged ash on his face, tangled his beard, and looked in the mirror. No one would recognize him. In that moment, Chief Adewale disappeared, and a hunched, weary beggar stood in his place. He walked out just before sunrise and made his way toward a village far from his estate. The sun rose slowly, casting long shadows on the dirt road. People passed him. Some glanced, some looked away. No one greeted him. A few even shifted to the other side of the path. His plan had begun. And as he sat down under a tree beside a dusty footpath, he began to wait. Not for food. Not for money. But for the first person who would stop. Not because they had to, but because they cared. Hours passed. Children laughed as they ran by. Women balanced baskets on their heads, too busy for a second look. Men rushed to work. One person dropped a coin without even looking at him. Another muttered something about him being lazy. But he didn't move. He waited quiet, still, watching the world rush past him as if he didn't exist. And then, something shifted. He saw a figure walking slowly in the distance. A girl, not too young, not too old. She had a cloth bag in one hand and what looked like a loaf of bread in the other. Her clothes were simple. Her steps were steady. As she approached, Chief Adewale didn't expect much. By now, he had grown used to disappointment. But she slowed down. She looked directly at him. And instead of walking past, she stopped. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then she bent down, tore a piece of bread, and held it out. "Here," she said softly. "You look tired." He blinked. He didn't take it at first. Not because he didn't want it, but because he hadn't expected it. She smiled, not the kind of smile people fake, but one that felt warm, honest. He took the bread. Their hands touched briefly. "Thank you," he muttered, his voice hoarse. He wasn't acting. The emotion was real. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't judge. She didn't preach. She simply sat down beside him. And that's where it began. A journey that would change everything. Not just for Chief Adewale, but for his son. Kemi had no idea what his father was up to. He assumed Chief Adewale had gone on one of his usual trips, visiting relatives, or maybe attending some community event. It wasn't unusual. His father often took time away to reflect, especially when their arguments became too heated. So when the house felt quieter than usual, Kemi simply carried on. He buried himself in work, scrolled through his phone, ignored calls from nosy aunties asking about that special someone, and made peace with his routine. But miles away, under the warm, dusty skies of a small village, Chief Adewale was living an entirely different life. After that first act of kindness, the torn bread, the gentle smile, the quiet compassion, the old man felt something stir in him. It had been a long time since anyone treated him like a human being without knowing who he was or what he had. And that girl, her name, he learned, was Amara. She wasn't wealthy. She wasn't from any known family. Her sandals were worn out. Her fingers were calloused. But her spirit, that was gold. Every day she passed that same path. And every day she stopped. Sometimes with bread. Sometimes with a piece of fruit. Sometimes just with words. They talked. Not about anything fancy. Just life. Her work at the local market. The struggles of looking after her younger siblings. The way people overlook those who have little. And how, in her eyes, being kind costs nothing. Chief Adewale listened. Not as a chief. Not as a father with a mission. But as a man who had lived long enough to know that rare hearts are never loud. They are quiet. Gentle. Steady. Like hers. One afternoon, he asked her a question. If you had everything, money, cars, houses, what would you do with it? She laughed softly. That's easy. I'd take my siblings to school. Buy medicine for Mama. Maybe open a small shop to sell proper goods. But I don't need riches. I just want peace. That answer sat with him for hours. She never once asked him for anything. Not even his name. And when he finally stood up to leave that spot one day, after many days of quiet conversations and shared silences, Amara did something no one else had done in weeks. She said, "Be safe. If you need anything, come find me." No expectation. No pity. Just pure concern. That night, Chief Adewale returned to a small guest house where he had been staying, far from his luxurious estate. He removed the ragged clothes and sat in silence. He had seen what he came to see. But the question remained, could she be the one? Not for him, of course. But for his son. A woman with no interest in wealth. No hidden agenda. Just kindness rooted deep in her soul. But how would he connect them? How could he introduce her to Kemi without ruining everything? He knew his son. Proud. sharp, suspicious. Kemi wouldn't trust anyone his father suggested, especially not someone from a village. So, the chief came up with another plan. A careful one. The next day, he returned to that dusty path, dressed once again as the beggar. When Amara arrived, he asked her for a favor. "My brother," he said, pretending, "has a son. A good boy. But he's lonely. Would you come meet him? Just to talk." Amara blinked. "Me?" He nodded slowly. "You're kind. You see people. He needs someone like that." She hesitated, then said, "If he's respectful, I don't mind. But only if he wants to meet." That answer told him everything. She wasn't chasing anything. Later that evening, Chief Adewale sent a message to Kemi through a trusted driver. "Come to the guest house tomorrow. There's someone I want you to meet." He didn't say more. Kemi was confused, but curious. It wasn't like his father to be so vague. Normally, there would be speeches, emotional talks, pressure. But this, it felt different. So the next morning, dressed in his usual simple style, white shirt, clean jeans, sandals, Kemi arrived at the guest house. When he walked in, he saw an old man, dressed poorly, sitting on a bench. And beside him, a girl. Simple, neat, calm. No fancy dress. No fake voice. Just presence. They both stood when he entered. And then, in front of them, the old man stood straight. Straighter than any beggar ever could. Kemi's eyes widened. "Dad." Chief Adewale smiled. "Son. Meet Amara." Before Kemi could speak, the girl looked at him, nodded politely, and said, "I didn't know who your father really was. I just saw a man who needed kindness." There was no awkwardness. No show. Just two strangers, standing in truth. And Kemi. For the first time in a long time, he had no word. Kemi stood frozen, staring at the girl in front of him, and then at his father. This wasn't just surprising. It was surreal. He looked back and forth, trying to process it all. His father had vanished for days. Now he reappeared, not as a chief, not in fine robes, but as a man who had been living among strangers, wearing rags, walking the streets like someone with nothing. And why? To bring this girl into his life? Kemi didn't know whether to laugh, be angry, or walk away. But something about the way Amara stood there, unshaken, calm, not trying to impress, made him pause. Chief Adewale broke the silence. "I know this is strange. I know you're wondering why I did this. But let me tell you something, Kemi." He stepped forward, looked his son in the eye. "All your life, you've been surrounded by people who want things from you. I wanted you to see what it looks like when someone cares without knowing what you have." Kemi didn't respond right away. He looked at Amara again. She wasn't trying to be seen. She wasn't performing. She simply stood with quiet dignity, as if she'd be okay whether he stayed or walked away. That was new to him. That stillness. That honesty. Finally, he spoke. "So, you didn't know he was a chief?" Amara shook her head. "I just thought he was a kind old man who needed someone to talk to. That's all." "And now you know?" Kemi asked, his voice sharp, testing. She didn't flinch. "Yes. And I'm still the same person." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. Chief Adewale sat down. He wasn't trying to convince anyone anymore. He had done his part. Now it was up to Kemi. So the son did what the father didn't expect. He sat down too. Right next to Amara. He didn't ask questions about her past. He didn't try to figure her out. He just said, "Tell me something real. Anything." Amara blinked, then smiled. "Okay. Real. I don't like noise. I don't like lies. I prefer simple things. I don't care about big houses. I just like people who mean what they say." Kemi nodded slowly. That was it. No flirtation. No games. No agenda. The next hour passed quietly. They spoke. About life. About family. About small joys, like the smell of clean rain or the sound of birds before sunrise. Amara didn't ask him what he did for a living. She didn't ask how much money he had. She didn't even ask about the mansion his father owned. And Kemi felt light. For the first time, he wasn't being evaluated, judged, sized up. Later that day, Chief Adewale stepped outside, giving them space. He stood in the courtyard and watched the sky turn soft with evening. He didn't eavesdrop. He didn't interfere. He just smiled to himself. Something was changing. And it wasn't forced. It wasn't planned. It was simply unfolding. The next few days, Kemi and Amara continued to meet. No pressure. No promises. Just slow, honest conversations. She didn't dress up to impress. He didn't try to charm her with status. And somehow, that simplicity made space for something rare. Trust. One morning, Kemi told his father, "She's different." Chief Adewale nodded. "I know." Kemi didn't say he was in love. He didn't make any grand speeches. But there was something in his eyes. Softer, thoughtful. He had always said love wasn't real. That no one was genuine. But now, faced with someone who gave without asking, who sat without judgment, who spoke without fear, he was starting to question that belief. One afternoon, Kemi walked Amara back to the market where she worked. Before she left, she turned to him and said something that stayed with him for days. "You don't have to prove anything to me. Just be real. That's enough." And that was exactly what he had been searching for, without knowing it. Weeks passed. The meetings continued, still without pressure, without titles, and without expectations. Kemi began visiting Amara more often. Not with flowers. Not with rehearsed lines. Just presence. He helped her carry baskets at the market. They talked while sorting tomatoes. Sometimes they just walked in silence. Chief Adewale, watching from a distance, said nothing. He didn't need to. He saw it all in his son's posture, in the way he smiled now, the way he listened more, talked less. One day, while Kemi and Amara sat under the same tree where she had first met the beggar that wasn't really a beggar, he asked her quietly, "What did you think when you found out who my father really was?" She looked at him, not blinking. It didn't matter. He was still kind. And you're still you. That answer melted something inside him. He thought about how many times he had pushed people away. How often he'd assumed the worst. And yet, here was someone who never chased, never doubted, never tried to take more than he was willing to give. That night, Kemi sat with his father in the living room. No TV, no phones, just quiet. He finally said the words Chief Adewale had waited years to hear. "She's special." The old man didn't react much. Just a small smile. Then a nod. "I know. I was wrong," Kemi added. "Not everyone wants something." His father leaned back. "You just had to see it for yourself." And Kemi finally understood what the disguise, the plan, and the entire act had been about. It wasn't just about finding him a wife. It was about showing him that real love, selfless love, still existed. Some days later, Kemi returned to the market. This time, he brought nothing in his hands. No ring. No proposal. Just a simple question. "Would you come meet my family properly?" Amara smiled. "I've already met one of them. When he wore old clothes and had ashes on his face." They both laughed. But this time, the laughter wasn't nervous or guarded. It was real. Weeks turned into months, and as things moved forward naturally, no one forced anything. No traditions were rushed. No ceremonies announced. But something had changed. Not just between Kemi and Amara, but in Kemi himself. He had started to believe. Not in fairy tales. Not in perfect people. But in real love. The quiet kind. The honest kind. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, doesn't chase. The kind that sits under a tree, tears a piece of bread in half, and says, "You look tired. Here, take this." And sometimes, that's all it takes.